Thank you all for coming. My name is Sarah Longthorne. I am a narrative designer, as may be suggested here. I'm going to talk to you about narrative design, so what it is, how to do it, and how to make it your job. So another thing to note as well, I'm going to be using examples from some of my favourite games. You will very quickly realise which games those are. Hopefully, there will be some spoilers. Hopefully the games are old enough that you won't get spoiled. So here we go, let's start off. So who am I? I am the narrative designer at Sumo Digital in Nottingham. I've been there for just under a month now. They've just released Team Sonic Racing, so definitely check that out. Before that, I was working on Love Island, the game. There is actually a game. It's actually surprisingly good. I really like working on it. Season 2 is coming out this week, so check it out on your phone. I've also done some work for Cthulhu Chronicles, RuneScape, Lock and Load, and a few other projects that haven't been announced yet, so I can't list them. And then before that, I studied script writing and performance at UEA, just kind of down the road, and also waited tables at the Pizza Express upstairs. Okay, so let's dive in. What is narrative design? Narrative design is basically when you get narrative, you get design, and you smush them together. It is something where we own the narrative, but we also own the design, the mechanics of the game, which impact the narrative. So things like choices, those things belong to us. So the mechanics and the narrative should complement each other in terms of your theme, your tone, your message. They should also be, they should have a synergy to them. They should be working off each other. A really great example of that is What Remains of Edith Finch. Also, the mobile game Florence absolutely nail this to perfection. Definitely check them out. I don't know if you've heard the term ludonarrative dissonance, but that's what we call it when you get this wrong. So imagine you are Geralt of Rivia in The Witcher 3. You have gone into someone's house, robbed them blind in front of them, and then they say, "Wow, Geralt, thanks for finding my frying pan." Messed that joke up, damn it. Okay, so the role itself, what will you be doing as a narrative designer? This is going to serve as kind of an agenda for my talk, so I'll go through these quickly now and then go into more detail. So the first thing is determining how story will be communicated. This is not only about, this is kind of like the scope of your story, how much room you have to tell a story, but also the means by which you do so. So whether you're using cutscenes or environmental storytelling, the different combinations, and that combination will be down to the kind of game you're making. So the next thing is creating a premise. This is the big idea that combines all the mechanics. The designers will come to you and they say, "Hey, we want to, make a game with climbing and, shooting and." How can we combine these? And you're like, well, Lara Croft. So there you go. Next is coming up with the storyline and the characters. I don't want to go into too much detail about this because I could talk for hours about story, but we're here to talk about narrative design, so we're going to be discussing the ways that story and characters intersect with games and design. And then we're going to talk about structuring that story. We are not writing a book. We are not writing the script for a film. Games are their own creature, and we need to treat them accordingly. Designing systems. Some of you might be more technically minded, and this will be a doddle for you. Others might be coming at it from more of a writing background. If you are, this isn't as scary as it sounds. It's actually really easy. We'll be talking about that later, but it's basically about implementing things like choices and branching narrative. And then usually you'll be writing. I've put usually in brackets here because it's not always the case. So a large AAA developer who are making a big narrative game, they might have a separate narrative designer and then someone else writing it. And if you don't like technical stuff, then maybe that's the right role. But most of the time you'll be doing both, and that's what I'm doing. So, I'm just going to take a quick sip. Writing in games. I want to talk through the kinds of writing you'll be doing. It serves as a kind of definition list. So the first is interactive scripts. So this is what you'll be doing for the majority of games that you work on. So things like cutscenes, but also dialogue that exists outside of cutscenes. So for example, in Portal, you are constantly in control of your character. There are no cutscenes, and yet you have GLaDOS talking to you over the top. And that's the kind of dialogue I'm talking about here. You'll also be, it's basically the same as screenwriting insofar that you are telling the other people working on the game what you want the other NPCs to be doing, what you want the place to look like. And that contributes to what we call environmental storytelling. If you walk into a room and everything's been upturned, you can probably guess that maybe you got robbed, or maybe the people left in a hurry. Okay, bark lines. So kind of similar, but bark lines are lines of dialogue that exist outside of cutscenes. They are triggered by things in the game. So say you are in combat and there are enemies nearby. Your character or another NPC might say, hey, there are enemies. They might point out health packs nearby. They give us useful information, but sometimes they're just there to fill the silence, like Geralt saying, wind's howling, or things like that. Okay, and the last thing is prose. There's less of this, so text adventures deal in prose, but usually in most games it'll be about item descriptions and lore books like the kind you find in Skyrim. A story fit for a game. So let's start with tension over time. You might have seen this. So the graph over there, this is very much, no actual data went into this, but the combat game graph is how I feel when I play a Dark Souls game. And the narrative game is how I feel when I play something like Life is Strange. So with the combat game, the tension comes from the combat, and the combat is these spikes here. And when we're out of combat, that's where the story lives. And there is probably either very little story, or the story is hidden. It's something that you discover as you go along, kind of like picking up puzzle pieces. So it's, going into combat, high stress, and then coming out, talk to the NPC, low stress. Whereas with narrative games, the tension comes from the story, but also from the mechanics. You are essentially trying to amplify the effects of your story with the mechanics. So you might have a high tension moment where Clementine is running from her life, from the zombies, and we put the onus on the player to save her life by giving you a quick time event. Or she has to make a difficult decision, and we will give that choice to the player, and it is their responsibility for whatever happens as a result. So the relationship between genre and narrative. We need to figure out what kind of game this is. Is this a game where the mechanics are the thing that people are playing for, and then we fit story around it? Or are we writing a story and then using the mechanics to amplify, like we just said? Ooh, come on, there we go. And as we saw in the previous graph, combat and things like a lot of gameplay can be stressful for the player. Some games want that. So Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, they capitalize on stress. People play those games because they kind of want that stress. They want the feeling of having achieved something after multiple failures, and that's fine. But not all games will want that. For some games, you will want to give the players a reprieve with some story, and it's up to you basically to figure out that ratio. If people want mechanics, then you don't want to shove too much story in their face. If they want story, then good to go crazy. There are different ways to tell a story. So we have discussed pretty much all of these already. And the way that you choose to tell a story, again, depends on the genre. So If you are playing a game which is mechanics-led, or like there's lots of combat or racing, for example, then you want to keep your story to a minimum. You want to keep it discreet and unintrusive. So you might, if you are going to have cutscenes, you might keep them short. You might make them skippable, or you might just not have cutscenes at all and leave telling your story to things like item descriptions and your environment. Make it more suggestive. Let the player pick up puzzle pieces and figure out what might be going on. Another thing I didn't mention here as well is the mechanics can tell the story themselves. So again, I mentioned Florence and What Remains of Edith Finch. Fantastic examples of using mechanics to tell a story. In the case of Florence, there is no text, no dialogue, nothing like that at all. It's just the mechanics that tell the story. And a nice little thing I'm very proud of that I came up with all by myself. So good narrative achieves tension on its own, but good narrative design uses gameplay elements to amplify and complement that tension and vice versa. To your premise and beyond. So I like to come at premise with perspective of, I like to think about it in terms of like the W questions, so your where, when, what, and why, and the silent H of how that no one talks about. So the first is what. This is your dilemma. This is the reason why the events in the game are happening, and what you'll be doing to solve them. Secondly, why. Why is it happening, and why does it matter? So the why might be a bit more backstory. The why does it matter is something we're going to come back to in a minute because it's really important. Where and when. So this is another big one. Your setting. This is actually the thing that a lot of the time is part of what sells the game, the skin on the game, the texture. That's what draws us in, and the experience is what keeps us there. So another nice little quote. An archetypal story creates settings and characters so rare that our eyes feast on every detail, while its telling illuminates conflicts so true to humankind that it journeys from culture to culture. If you haven't read Story by Robert McKee, read Story by Robert McKee. The next one is who. So this is about your player character. Who are they? Who is the person who is best equipped to tell this story? Because this person is going to be the player's window into the world. How they perceive things colours the player's experience. So we need to make sure that we're getting the right person for the job. I'm going to go through these in a minute, but basically it comes down to whether this person is an established character, a flexible character, or a blank slate. And how, the silent H of how is your arsenal of mechanics. This is how you will operate with all these things. So the player character. We have three options, and the first is an established character. So let's talk about Lara Croft, all right? Lara Croft, her identity is set in stone. We can't change the way she looks. We can't change her profession, her gender, her age, any of that. We can't change her skill set. But that doesn't matter because she's the perfect person for the role. She needs to be good at parkour and combat, and that's exactly what she's great at. If you can be Lara Croft, why be anyone else? Be Lara Croft. She's also iconic. She's the face of the game, and that's just great for marketing. We wish we were her. And also another thing to say is that Tomb Raider is an action game. We are there to do parkour, to shoot people. Let's not deny it. But also that means that it doesn't necessarily matter who you are. Gordon Freeman in Half-Life, we don't really see his face in the game at all unless we find a mirror. So yeah, it doesn't matter. Flexible characters, very similar to established insofar that their core identity is established. They are still the face of the game. They are still perfect for the role. When I say perfect for the role here, it can be a bit nuanced. So Max Caulfield from Life is Strange, for example, she isn't always the most competent character, but she is a character who experiences a lot of social anxiety. And her mechanic is that she can rewind time. And which one of us, especially those of us who struggle with anxiety, hasn't thought, damn, I wish I could change that. So she is thematically perfect. The thing about flexible characters is that we can change the nuance of their character through choices. So they are still recognizably themselves, but at the end of the day, we are the sum of our choices, and so you are still having an impact on them. You can think about it kind of as the parts of their personality that are set in stone are like the walls of a playground, and there are certain swings and slides, and you can go ham on those swings and slides, but those are the things that you have control over. And mainly these flexible characters are for games about people and relationships. And lastly, a blank slate. So how many of you have played Skyrim? Okay, so a lot of you have been the Dragonborn. Okay, I thought I was the only one. So it's mainly RPGs for this blank slate character. Nothing is established. You have complete control over them. So their appearance, their skill set, personality is questionable because you don't have much opportunity to show it. But the thing is that that's fine because it lives inside the player's head. The imagination is a powerful thing, and these kinds of games are a role player's dream. So we talked a bit about why at the end, if that's all right. We talked a bit about why this all matters, and there is a reason. So having a cool premise isn't good enough because the player doesn't care about your story yet. They are there to kill baddies and drive up their XP and finish the game they paid £40 for. They don't care about finding your surrogate daughter. And if you are forcing that story on them through cutscenes, even if they are skippable, they're going to get annoyed at you and your work is going to be wasted. So we need to make them care. And the way we do that is by making it emotional. And the way that we make it emotional is by putting a face onto the dilemma. We give the player characters who they care about, and we implicate them in the problem. And that in turn provides us with our stakes and our motives. Our motive is to help the people we care about, and the stakes are the fact that if we don't do it, then they get in a lot of trouble. So, the problem now that we face is that developing a relationship with a character takes time. We want the player to care about these people, otherwise this isn't going to work. But we have limited time. We want to get them involved in the story as fast as possible. So what are some things that we can do to expedite the process of caring? The first is kind of a cheat. We have a psychological inclination towards certain kinds of characters, and this comes down to our primal human instincts. Our biggest instinct, arguably, is to procreate. And so we are going to be more interested in people who are romance options and people who we are charged with protecting children. We want them to stay alive, and we're interested in where this romance could go. So we will be more interested in keeping these people happy and healthy. Next up, another small bit of basic psychology. We feel good about helping people. When you help someone, you like them more because you feel good about yourself and you associate that good feeling with the person. We like them because we've helped them. And also, another thing is that you can mess this up if they are ungrateful, then it has the entirely opposite effect. But the way that you can use this in your game is by doing things for NPCs, which, funnily enough, is what you're doing most of the time in a game. The more effort we've invested in someone, the more we'll want to protect them. And again, this comes into doing nice things for people, because by doing nice things for people, you're putting in effort. When we have put in effort with a character, we don't want to waste that if they die. So we have more incentive to protect them. And we dislike characters who threaten them as a result. A few more. So we usually prefer people we've spent quality time with. I think that's something we all know. By spending time with people, we understand their complexities, and we really like complex people. So you might want to have a quest line dedicated to finding out more about a character, or understanding their backstory, or just a scene on its own. That will all help. An on-brand introduction that triggers an emotional reaction creates a stronger, more decisive first impression. first impressions are so important. And in particular in this case, it comes into a screenwriting idea that we call saving the cat, which a lot of people hate, but it's undoubtedly useful. If you show someone, if your first impression of someone, your first introduction to them is them being horrible to a cat, then you're going to think, wow, that guy's a jerk. And then whenever they do things from then on, you're going to colour it with the idea that they're probably a jerk. Whereas if your first introduction to someone is them saving a cat, you're going to be like, oh, that's nice. And whenever you see them in the future, you'll be like, wow, that's a nice person. They're really good. But when I say on brand also, they need to be the most themselves at the first point you meet them, because this basically helps us get to know them faster. And as we've mentioned, knowing someone makes us like them more. And then the last one, gameplay isn't lost time. You can still develop relationships even while you're in interactive scenes. So you can have an NPC following you around, and you can be talking to them, you can have their bark lines, and that still develops the relationship. So the shape of game narrative. I'm just going to swap my notes around. Okay, so we're going to talk about the way that we can encounter narrative in games. And we're going to go more high level first and then dive in. So the world of quests, it changes from game to game. So some games, it's more linear. Games like Life is Strange, for example, the game starts at the start of the main quest, in this case the only quest, and it ends at the end of that quest. There are no side quests. You can only do the one thing. You only have one objective at a time. Next up, we have something which is a little more dynamic. So you will see this in games like The Witcher, but also Tomb Raider. The game starts at the point of the main quest, and the credits initially roll at the end of the main quest, but there are other things that we can be doing. And they tend to unlock when you come to a new area, or when you reach a certain point in the story, or when you get enough XP. And lastly, we have this diamond with a soup of quests inside it. And this is kind of like Skyrim again. The game kind of unleashes you on this world, into this world, and you have to just basically encounter quests as you go along, and they all exist at kind of the same time. You don't need to do them in any particular order. It's all great. So let's break it down. When we are creating our quest, and let's go with our main quest first, the first thing we need to do is consider what the player's objective is, because achieving this objective is going to be our main quest. And to do that, we need to break it down. So what are the required steps from getting from step A to step B? So for example, for Geralt of Rivia, he wants to find his surrogate daughter because she's in danger from the wild hunt. So what are the steps he needs to take to do that? Well, first he needs to find out where she was last seen. To find out where she was last seen, he needs to find the person who last saw her. To do that, he needs to track them down and find out where they are. But it is not interesting if there are no obstacles in the way. So we want to frustrate this process. So for example, I've went too far, but for example, Geralt finds the person who needs to help him, who knows where his daughter was last seen, but that person has a curse on them now. They can't talk to you. That's really annoying. So now he has to go on his own little quest to find out how he can solve the curse, and then he can continue onwards. Okay. And then the last thing, so when you are approaching an obstacle, basically it comes down to two things: whether you are going to take on the obstacle or you are going to find an alternate route. So taking on the obstacle is Geralt's route when he decides to solve the curse. However, in Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship are meant to be going over the mountain pass, and then Saruman throws some snowballs at them, shouts at them a little bit, and they're like, right, well, I guess we're going to Moria. And that ends up being a much more interesting story. This is called the lock and key approach. The idea being that we want to get from step A to step B. Step B here is wanting to open the door. However, when we go to open the door, it is closed. We must first find the key, and then the door is open. And most games tend to be a sequence of these, just lots of little squares. Okay, so quests in terms of nouns and verbs. This is a really interesting approach that I learned from one of the developers on Horizon Zero Dawn. You can find the talk on YouTube. I just mentioned it here. But it's basically a really good way to approach mostly side quests and standalone quests, but also to ground your quests in the mechanics. So I want you to think about your interactive actions, the mechanics, as verbs. So things like climb, kill, steal, also things like convince, search, all of these things are verbs. And the things you can do those things to are your nouns. So whether it's a boss or an NPC or a chair, those are all the verbs. And what we are going to do is we are going to take a random selection, mix them up, combine them, and see what we get. This is just an exercise, and the result is going to be very basic, so don't judge me. But we are going to find a story which brings all of this together. So here is our example. I have chosen sneak, search, fight, and climb for my verbs, and my nouns are guards, music box, captain, and window. This was a random selection, but as you can see, it works very nicely. You're probably looking at this and thinking, I know exactly where this is going to go. So the result, sneak and guards. You sneak past the guards to go into the fortress. Next, we have search and music box. We search for the music box, which the quest giver has told us to find. And then we have fight and captain. So disaster, the captain walks in, he finds you, and now you must fight for your life. Climb and window. So maybe he decides to leave before you kill him. He locks you in, calls for reinforcements, and you can't take them all on. So you're looking around, you're thinking, I can't go out the door, where can I go? There is a window, and thankfully you know how to climb. So you climb up to the window. A nice way to layer a new dimension onto this is with adverbs. So adverbs might be quickly or quietly, and it's self-explanatory. Okay, we're going to come to choices because this is what I'm good at. Most of my experience has been on choices, with the Love Island game in particular. So there are 4 types of choices as I tend to break them down. The first is an action choice. So this is a course of action that you decide on. It could be tactical, it can be strategic. Also, it can be either implicit or explicit. So we are used to choices with a UI, which ask us to do this or do that. But some choices come down to which mechanics you choose to use at any point. You have an array of mechanics before you, and you can switch between them. That is an implicit choice, whereas explicit would be choices where you have a UI asking you to make a certain decision. Reaction choices. So these are where something has happened and an NPC is like, what do you think about that? And then you tell them. And these are great because everyone has opinions and everyone really likes giving them. So players feel quite validated when you ask them for their opinion. It's also a really good thing to use if your player is going to have to do something they might not like. It gives them the opportunity to say so. And if we're going to make them do it anyway, then it gives the NPCs a good opportunity to explain why it's very important that they do so. Influencing choices. So these are choices where you're essentially giving advice. It might not be presented as advice, it might be veiled. But these are choices where what we say causes an NPC to act in a certain way. And those actions will have consequences that we still feel responsible. Ooh, okay, there we go. That we still feel responsible for. And then the last one is influencing choice. Oh, that's the one we just had. The last one is texture choices. So texture choices on the surface, they feel like things which only deal with things on the surface. And seemingly that's the case. But these are, even in their pure and simple forms, really useful because they give players that feel-good feeling of making the game feel like something that they own, something they created. Whether it's changing the colour of a light in a room or choosing the music that you listen to, it creates that feeling that this is your world, that you have you've put your fingerprints on it. Handprints, footprints, there we go. So mixing choice types. The great thing is that most choices don't fall into one category, they fall into several. So you might find this in particular with influencing choices. So you might decide on a course of action, and someone's like, oh, that's a good idea, actually, I'm going to do that myself. You see this a lot in games about parenthood. So The Walking Dead, the final season, and Life is Strange 2 are both about raising children. And the game explicitly tells you at the start that your actions are going to influence who these children become. They are copying you, they are learning from you. And these are action choices and also sometimes opinions that you give, reaction choices, which are disguised. They're basically actually influencer choices. They are disguised as actions and reactions. And I'm going to briefly talk to you about the reason why texture choices are much cooler than they seem. Let's think of The Witcher 3, okay? So let's say that you are doing one of the political storylines. You are installing this ruler or killing this ruler. It's something which seemingly has a big impact on the world, but actually it doesn't have that much impact in terms of the workload that we have to do. So we are swapping assets, essentially. The story continues as it was, as it would have. The script doesn't necessarily branch except in small places. We swap in some assets, we change some lines of dialogue here and there, and we swap in some bark lines, and maybe we add a few non-humans burning at the stakes in Novigrad, and then we get the feeling that we've had this big impact. So a nice little quote as well. I like my quotes. This is going to sort of bring us into the next slide. True character is revealed in the choices a human being makes under pressure. The greater the pressure, the deeper the revelation, and the truer the choice to the character's essential nature. So we want to bring the pressure. Binary good versus evil choices are really boring. For the majority of players, they want to play the good guy because it feels good to be the good guy. And so if you present them with do the bad thing or do the good thing, they're going to do the good thing without even thinking about it. They are not engaged anymore, and we need them to be engaged. So there are 3 ways that we can do this. The first way is strategy. This is very closely linked with the action choices. So a good example of this is Horizon Zero Dawn. It explicitly tells you that your choices are categorized into using your head, your heart, or your strength. And there's a scene right at the start where a little boy throws a rock at you, leaves a little gash on your head, and you have a rock of your own. He has another rock, he's going to throw another one. You have to decide whether to throw your rock at his head, hit him back, whether you throw the rock at his hand and disarm him, or whether you turn the other cheek. And what you're basically hoping for is if you hit his head, then maybe you get an Ender's Game type thing where by showing superior strength he backs off. But maybe also you're hoping that by using your heart, he will be forced to question his actions. So with this choice type, we don't know what the outcome will be. We are guessing. We are looking at it and thinking, well, I think this one might be better. So you pick that, and it's a surprise. The next one is bad feels good / good feels bad. So when there are no stakes, it is very convenient and cheap to do the right thing. No one goes out, well, not very many people go out into the world thinking, I'm going to be an evil villain today, right? People don't do that. People want to be good. They try to do the right thing, and it's emotion that complicates this. So as an example, season 1 of The Walking Dead, there was this character called Ben. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Ben, but I really hated him. He was so annoying. He even had this annoying face. And the thing is that the people, so Telltale wanted me to hate him. They wanted me to, because I had this character, I had Clementine, she was a little child, I was looking after her, I had put effort into keeping her alive, I had spent time getting to know her. And he was putting her life in danger at every opportunity. And I was doing nice things for him. I was giving him the benefit of the doubt, giving him second chances, and every time that guy squandered them. And I hated him for it. And so when it came down to it, spoilers, cover your ears if you don't want it. He's hanging from a bell tower, and it's down to me to decide whether he falls or if I save him. And it would have been so easy just to save him and do the right thing. And any other situation, like, you would have saved the guy, right? You would save someone if you could. No. I didn't save him. Screw that. He was so annoying that I let him fall. And yes, like, I did feel mixed up about it. It wasn't an easy decision to make because I wanted to play the good guy, like I always do, but he pushed my buttons. I really didn't like him. Okay, nice quote about this. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Martin Luther King, my boy. Okay, last one, the lesser evil. So this is a running theme in The Witcher 3. You never have a win-win choice. You never have a win-lose choice. It is always different degrees of this sucks, and you have to decide which of those which sucks is less offensive to you. So a good example as well is the end of Life is Strange. You have two choices. Actually, before I go into the choices, so you have your best friend Chloe, absolute bae. We love her. We've spent time getting to know her. We've put effort into saving her life. That's been our objective. On the other hand, we have Arcadia Bay, another kind of bay. And Arcadia Bay is full of people that we have also gotten to know. We have put effort into getting to know these people. We have even potentially saved someone's life. It's another one of our objectives too, to save the town. But at the end of the game, we can't save both. We have to sacrifice Bay or Bay. We have to save Bay or Bay. We have to make that choice between which of these things we value more. Team Chloe, by the way. Okay, choice structures. I'm just going to shuffle my notes along. Okay, so what does it look like in practice? This is what we think of when someone says branching narrative. You might recognize this shape from Bandersnatch, the Netflix Black Mirror film. The great thing about this is that every time we branch, we have something unique. It feels consequential, which players love. But on the flip side, every time we do this, we essentially double our workload. It's very uneconomical. We can't afford to do it. So what do? We use a diamond structure, which I realize does not look like a diamond here, but just follow me along. So when we do a diamond structure, we have our narrative, and we branch maybe for a few lines of dialogue, maybe for a few scenes. But ultimately, we find a good place in the narrative to flatten it back out, bring it back into the one story we want to tell really well. And games like the Telltale games, like Life is Strange, use this structure again and again and again until it basically looks like a string of beads. But the best way, in my opinion, is to combine them. So we have the string of diamonds going all the way down until the end when we finish on an absolute branch. So this gives us the ability to keep the player engaged with choices, but then to give them something really finite and absolute at the end, which feels decisive. Another thing I was going to say about that as well. So the thing about the diamond structure is sometimes players will feel like, nothing's changed. I've made all these choices, but ultimately I'm getting to the same place. By using the zipper structure, at least the end is branched, but also it's important to note that the journey matters as much as the destination. And as we said earlier, if we are products of our choices, then we are influencing the character, and that character changes, and so do the people around her. And talking about Clementine now, didn't tell you that. And her relationship to those characters, the way you get there is different. So let's look at a quick case study. I'm aware of time. So Telltale's The Walking Dead. On this side, this is the start of the first episode. This is just more to show you the structure and how it looks. So they are using the diamond structure. It also has delayed consequences. So if you go out during the day, no one dies. And so when it comes to fixing the fence, Herschel doesn't understand the extent of the zombie crisis. So he won't fix the fence, and that will have consequences later on. However, if you go out during the nighttime, one of your buddies is going to die, and that forces Herschel to realize that there is something serious going on and fix the fence. And later on in the episode, we have to make a choice. 2 characters are in danger, and we can only save 1. And what's interesting here is that the person who's made this diagram, at least in terms of the way they've presented it, they've made it look like it divides absolutely into 2 different strands. And yes, it will, it'll come back together later on, but this isn't actually what's happening. If you play through twice, if you save one person one time, the other the other, then you will see that there's actually a lot in common. They are still following the same structure. And actually what's happening is you are following one branch down the middle, but branching just for the scenes that those people are referenced in. I'm just going to talk about systems very, very briefly. Again, aware of time. So systems are where they are the mechanics that we control. So things like choices and branches, they are mechanics, but we need to be the ones to implement them and say, this is where I want to do a choice. These are the things I'm choosing between. This is the consequence I want to happen. And so systems are basically a way that we communicate to programmers, for example, what we want to happen. What I just said. Okay, so what this requires is a very, very basic grasp of a coding language. Again, if you are more creative, less technical, this might sound scary. It's not. It's so basic. I'm really stupid, and I got this. I'm not that stupid. You can learn this very easily on Code Academy or even just YouTube. It's basically just values and variables. You don't need to learn how to actually write in a scripting language. You need to be able to communicate the notions, the idea of what you are trying to achieve to someone else. You can do that using what we essentially call pseudocode. So things like Twine, you can create games in Twine, and it uses pseudocode, and that's a really great way to learn about this, but also to experiment and see what's possible using these values and variables. If you can play the Talos principle, this is easy. If that all sounds good, then let's briefly talk about careers. How do you make a career in narrative design? So I'll talk you through my journey. So I did my degree in script writing, as we discussed, and then I went into marketing because I didn't know that you could make a career in games writing. Like if you were in Jodie's talk just now, she said a very similar thing. We didn't know that it existed. I thought, okay, I want to write for a living. If I want to write novels, then I have to do it in my spare time until my big break. If I want to work in films, well, that's just going to be really, really difficult. I might have a lot of trouble breaking in. No one told me about the games industry. I had to figure that out for myself about 2 years later. When I moved into the games industry, still in a marketing role, and I sort of realized, hang on, people are writing these games, and I'm a writer. It started to click, very slowly started to click. So I took the initiative. Within about a month of working at, in this case, Jagex, I went up to the narrative designers and I said, hey, I want to learn this. Give me opportunities. Let me prove myself. And they gave me those opportunities, and that allowed me to start building a portfolio. And it's through that portfolio that I was able to start applying for narrative design jobs. And the thing I want to say here very quickly is that you should apply for jobs even if you don't fit the criteria. If you don't have all the requirements, that's fine. So literally my boss told me yesterday, when we create the requirements on a job ad, this is our fantasy person. And we want the person who comes closest to this. So when you are creating your job application, your job is to make it seem like you're the closest they're going to get to it. But you don't have to fill every box. Tick every box. So when I failed those applications, I asked for feedback. And that's sort of self-explanatory. They gave me what I needed to know to learn and improve, but also it gave me the validation of the things that I was doing right. And the main takeaway there is confidence and enthusiasm. If you can show that you're enthusiastic about something, then you're probably more willing to learn. And as a little tip, hiring managers mistake confidence for competency. Yeah, if you can come across as confident, they'll be like, wow, she knows her stuff. And you're like, yeah, I do. And I found a mentor. So I was very, very lucky with this. I started chatting with Greg Buchanan, who wrote most notably on, I've forgotten the name now, No Man's Sky. We started chatting on Twitter, and then he decided he wanted to take on a mentor, and he contacted me. So that was surprisingly easy, but I don't think it is in the majority of circumstances. But if you can find a mentor, find a mentor. They are so, so helpful. Greg has helped me immensely. And then I jumped into freelance. I thought, well, I haven't had any success with getting a full-time job. I'm tired of marketing. There aren't any jobs here at Jagex. I'm going to just wing it and see what happens. And it worked out well, especially with Greg's help. And then a job came up within 2 months. So as a summary of the things that you need to do to break into the industry, and again, I can't say this will definitely work for everyone, but this will give you your best chance. So build your portfolio. The things that we discussed earlier, interactive script and barks especially, needs to be in there. You can have prose as well, but keep it at the bottom because that's not what you'll be doing in the majority of games. And if you don't have if you haven't worked on any games yet, make your own. It doesn't matter that much. They want experience, yes, but if you can show that you can do it anyway, then that will get you a lot of the way. You can use things like Twine, RenPy, Ink, they're all free, and then RC Draft 3 is annoyingly expensive, but it's also good. Consume knowledge. Go to conferences like this one. Look up the GDC Talks Vault on YouTube. Read articles, but also, as I mentioned, learn the fundamentals of code. Just values and variables will get you as far as you need to go. Dive into the community. So again, conferences, network, talk to speakers like me. Social media, get involved in the conversation, but be respectful. Talk to people. They want to be talked to a lot of the time. And seek out mentorship and support where possible. So BAFTA Crew is a fantastic resource for support. There's also a new initiative called Limit Break, which is for underrepresented members of the community. I think it's just filled up, but keep an eye on it because there will be more opportunities.
What was that one?
Limit Break is just down here. So you can find it on Twitter, I think. I think it's just... I can show you afterwards. I'll find it on my phone. But yeah, apply, and apply. Just apply. And you don't get the opportunities that you don't apply for. If you do apply, you might. It's a no-brainer. That's it. Thank you all for coming. I will be outside to talk more if you'd like to, but I think we have time for some questions if anyone has them. Hi.
Hello. Do you think there's any future in interactive TV, and would you like the chance to work in TV instead of games?
Yes and yes. Yeah, I think, to be honest, Bandersnatch as an example, I think it paved the way for that. I think we're going to see more of it. I've already seen a few job ads from Netflix, for example, asking for narrative designers. I think it's a great opportunity, and our skill set is being used more broadly for different mediums, and that's awesome. And yes, please, Netflix, if you're watching this, hi. Yes, anyone else? Hi.
I was wondering about like framed narration,
Mm-hmm.
like where you have like stories, or like where you have like narratives where like maybe you're inhabiting a role,
Okay.
but like the role doesn't have any character, but it's more, but that role gives you like a frames your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember the game, but I think like one with like a Cthulhu like cult where you're the cult leader,
Mm-hmm.
and they have like a yellow and green color scheme and
Mm-hmm.
all that sort of thing, which is like a reflection of the fact that you're this person.
Sounds good. What's the question? Sorry.
I forgot.
Okay.
Yeah, never mind.
That's fine. Do you want to? We can talk about it afterwards if,
Yeah.
if it comes to you. More questions?
Yeah, hello.
Yeah?
Well, I guess it's a comment as well.
Okay.
Prior to today, I was quite ignorant of narrative design and what it's all about, and it's been really interesting for me in terms of like creativity and trying to come up with game ideas. How a lot of what you were talking about seemed to dictate how a game, like the shape of the game ultimately, which really helps when you're sitting there at the code stage and
Yeah.
building something. So that's awesome. And
Thanks.
yeah, I've looked into books on storytelling in the past, and you mentioned Robert McKee's book, which I just wish listed.
Nice. Well done.
What else? Are there any others that you recommend? Like, what really worked for you?
I will need to think about that. There are definitely some, but they're not coming to me right now because I'm really tired. Drop me a message on Twitter.
Yeah,
My Twitter is here. My DMs are open. I will think of some ideas and I will send them over to you.
I'll do that.
Okay, cool. Anyone else?
I've tried like tools such as like Twine and Inkle. Which would you recommend for like?
I like Twine better, mainly because the pseudocode language that we used for the Love Island game is basically based off Twine, and so it's what I'm more familiar with. I haven't used Inkle that much. I just know about it, so I'm biased. But Twine fan over here. Anything else?
Oh, just one more. My daughter's 8 and she's writing a choose your own adventure book. Have you got some simple advice for her?
Simple advice. Don't wait for other people to tell you how to write a choose your own adventure game. Don't wait for me to do this talk. Do it the way she wants to do it, the way it comes naturally to her. Have her forge her own path and see what happens. And then if she gets stuck, then she can look at resources like this. But otherwise, the best way to do it is to just do it and see what happens. And then failing that, get her to watch this talk on YouTube. Okay, anyone else? All right, I'm going to get a pizza.